Mr. Rohinton Medhora, thank you very much for joining us. You're from CG, obviously, our co-sponsors here at the Changing of the Guard themed conference in Hong Kong. Let's talk first about this theme and how much and what it means to you in terms of the way we're kind of shaping the global geopolitical debate.
INET was conceived, and this is why CG was attracted to INET, as a forum where alternative thinking that's also credible would be promoted. When you think about what happened in 2008, it wasn't just a crisis in economics, it was actually a crisis in the way we were approaching public policy. So changing of the guard is a continuum in which we're thinking about different kinds of changing of the guard, and I think that's apparent in the program. There's changing of the guard, obviously, in terms of where the centers of power globally are located. From the east, from the west to the east, north, south, in different ways. But there's also changing of the guard in the way we think about economics and the way we think about how people, the economic man, behaves. So there's that changing of guard within the discipline. And finally, I'd say there's a changing of the guard in the way in which we approach policy, in the way that social media and technology more broadly inform people, empower them, sometimes not, but often empower them, and how they can make a difference in the way decisions are made. So there's a sort of stew of issues that combines into changing of the guard, which is what this conference is about.
How do you think we in this part of the world then can look at this changing of the guard? Is Asia still finding its feet in terms of the kind of philosophical debate about how it approaches the world? Is there already a new paradigm in place philosophically as well as economically that it can either demonstrate to the rest of the world or give it as an example?
We're not there yet, but I'd also say that we've never been there yet. There was a quotation from a Chinese visitor to the UK in the 1870s, which was a glowing rendition of the rule of law and the justice system in the UK. Now that's interesting because at the same time, if you read what Charles Dickens was saying about the British justice system, it was quite different. My point is that whenever you have success, there's the but that goes after success. And that's no different 150 years ago in the West, and it should be no different here. In this region, there's stunning success. There's no question that there is. The region has grown much faster and covered more people than the Industrial Revolution did. The UNDP report that was released last month makes that point. Others have as well. But there's always the but. What about environmental degradation? What about politics? What about rights? What about different forms of friction that inevitably accompany progress and change? And so I don't see this so much as an Asian model asserting itself over a Western model. I see it much more as different folks, different cultures and different regions working their way towards what they define as progress and well-being. And there needn't be any kind of conflict between these so long as we understand what the drivers are.
In this part of the world, the debate about sustainable growth is fledgling. We're looking at Hong Kong, we're looking at skyscrapers all around us. Growth in this part of the world to many tens of millions of people means a very different thing. And you're talking about coming up together with this new framework. How can we do that without some people sacrificing what they see as their right, a more sustainable way of growing?
This tension has always been with us, by the way. It's not unique to East Asia. In Canada, we have the same issue currently with respect to the development of the oil sands in northern Alberta and the pipelines that will be needed to ship this oil south to the US and through our west coast east to Asia. And these pipelines will go through communities and native territory where the issue is highly contested. So my point is that no region is uniquely positioned to say that somehow there's this conflict between growth and sustainability, and that, you know, we've got this dilemma and you don't, we all do. Obviously, if we knew the answer to where we'd come out on this, we wouldn't need INET and we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. I think the important thing is that we have people discuss these issues, analyze them, and arrive at the right balance. And that when the right balance is arrived at, people can look at that and say credibly, this is about right. Of course there'll be winners and losers in everything, whether it's free trade, whether it's a new technology. Some people gain and some people lose. When the wheel was invented, folks who went about with square wheels were put out of business. But that's the way it is. What matters is how the decision was taken, whether overall we're better off, and whether we have ways in which the losers can be compensated by the winners.
Let's talk about, as well as the Institute is your Centre for International Governance. Can you have growth without the rule of law? Can you have growth without human rights? Are they intrinsically intertwined? Do one sit comfortably with the other?
The really honest answer is we don't know. The more nuanced answer would be that we have to distinguish between necessary and sufficient conditions for growth, and we also have to be clear about what we're talking about. And so rule of law might mean different things to different people. There is no single definition of rule of law. Take corruption. There are parts of the world where corruption is seen as debilitating, as coming in the way of growth. Yet we can point to lots of growth and development success stories where, frankly, corruption is very prevalent. And so you have to ask yourself, is corruption something that's debilitating, or is it something that's actually enabling the growth process? Seems odd to say, but it is possible to think about these issues in different ways. I'm not for corruption. I'm simply giving you an example of how bad can coexist with good, and sometimes the two feed off each other.
Let's move forward, if you don't mind, as well. One of the things that Asia is very deeply looking at is moving up the kind of global value chain. How China does that, how India does that. Countries like Indonesia are not quite there yet. How do they rise up this global value chain, kind of tune into innovation to keep one step ahead of just kind of managing their populations in the sort of most basic way? How can they move up this global value chain?
Jim Balsillie made the point that as some countries move up the value chain, others by definition will have to move down. That's just a fact. As he said, if there's a different 1, 2, 3, well, the current 1, 2, 3 become 4, 5, 6 or some other number. It doesn't follow, though, that this is a zero-sum game, because the global pie is increasing, and so it comes back to a question of distribution of the gains. That's one thought. The other is countries moving up the global value chain is not a new phenomenon. When Britain was leading the Industrial Revolution, some decades later, France and Germany moved up the global value chain, as it were, except we didn't call it that at the time. And in the end, everyone was better off as a result. And so we have to look for these solutions in which, to be sure, there will be friction along the way. But there's no question that countries, as they become richer, will find different ways of doing technology. Labor becomes more expensive, as we're already seeing in India and China. That forces them to move up the value chain. It's not a policy decision sometimes. It's just a blindingly obvious thing that will happen. And so I don't see moving up the global value chain as a bad thing, nor do I see it often as a choice.
Let me ask you about innovation. Is it about a new way of thinking? Is it about technology, scientific advance, finding new ways of sustainable energy, or all of the above?
I think that's a good but very important question, because it's okay for words to be all-encompassing, but they cannot become plastic words, and I'm afraid that innovation tends to be one of those words that's overused. I see innovation as being three things, and they're connected, but it helps to think of them separately. One is innovation as scientific advance, making the better widget. The second is what I'd call business innovation. This is innovation as you see it in the business press, which is Research in Motion is a very innovative company. Well, what that means is they make products that lots of people like, and the company is very profitable. And so that's a second kind of innovation. Countries, Finland is said to be a very innovative country. Why? Very successful exports, a very healthy balance of payments, and that's seen as innovation. And the third kind of innovation would be what I'd call social innovation. That's what you were talking about in terms of new ways of thinking about things. Microcredit, or the use of cell phones to buy and sell things, is social innovation. Innovation is all of these three things, but the public policy responses and the scholarly work involved in each of these streams is quite different.
You're looking ahead to next year and possibly a new theme that will encompass innovation. How do you think that, particularly for across these three sectors that you were talking about, how do you think that you can take those ideas and disseminate them for the greater good, if you like, of the globe?
This is going to be the challenge for the organizers of the conference next year. My guess is that innovation in some form will be central to the work and the theme of the conference. How we do it is something that will fall into place. But what I'd like to see is a clear sense of what we mean by innovation, a sense that we need all these different kinds of innovation and that we cannot start narrowing the concept to the exclusion of other things, and then a recognition that promoting these different kinds of innovation, all of which will be solutions to getting out of the crisis we're in currently, requires different drivers, different responses, and different ways of doing things.
You mentioned mobile phones, for example. I know that in Africa, obviously, that has revolutionized from the ground up ways of doing business, communication. India as well, where mobile phones are, used for all sorts of reasons, for business, communication, social media. It's kind of an interesting concept that's come from down there and then up. But I see sort of people like you, thinkers like you, as a way of kind of facilitating that progress, if you like, harnessing the energy that's already there.
But that's the point, that innovation is not something that's simply driven by scientists in labs or CEOs or folks at the top. Innovation is happening every day all around us, and the job of public policy is to create the environment in which innovation is encouraged, and then innovation is transmitted and translated across different environments, because what works in Africa would not necessarily work elsewhere. Well, how can you make it work elsewhere? And so that's what the nub of innovation is about. And yes, that's what CG, in its small way, tries to do, is to understand innovation and help us innovate everywhere.
Okay, Mr. Medhora, thank you very much
Thank you
for joining us.